in the inner cities, the only reason why it has to be revitalized is because, unfortunately or unfortunately, we haven't had consistent leadership. And that leadership sometimes concentrated on the surface of Islam instead of the inner or the spirituality of Islam. So to revitalize something means to renew it. Something that was in place, and then to revitalize it or to make it anew. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to just make sure that the wheel got air in it. And as we are moving forward, we have to make sure that we don't run over the same roads that we ran over before to make the tire flat or for the tire to lose air. So when you talk about the forgotten Muslims in the prison system, they are forgotten because we don't want to think of ourselves. Anytime that you forget something on purpose or intentionally, it's because you really are into your own thing. And I'm speaking from experience. Because when you are into your own mind frame or in your own heart, it allows you to forget about something that's either right in front of you or on the side of you or behind you. And especially if it's behind you, you're not going to think about it. But if it's right in front of you, you can forget about it because your desire or your intentions is not to concentrate on that. Now, we all know that we live in a country, and it was mentioned in a subject matter yesterday, one of the topic matters, Imam Khalid said that America is the country that incarcerates more of its population than any other industrialized country in this world. Now, we got to think about that population. And then on top of that, try to persuade us with misdirections, saying that it is not a discriminatory apparatus. That just because there are more black and brown people incarcerated, that don't mean that it's a discriminated system. And that's a lie. I have worked in 4 different states as a Muslim chaplain. And I'm telling you from experience, when I walk in there, besides the people that got on the uniform that look like me, the next people that is in those orange or white or black, or not black, black and white uniforms is people that look like me. And the last day I worked, the last correctional system I worked in was in Texas. And one of the last weeks that I worked there, there was a brother that came in, he was 17 years old. And Texas give away prison terms like you give out M&Ms. You know, like you force my M&Ms, it's just in their hand. So they give out sentences like it is nothing. So this brother had an accessory to robbery, driving the car, I don't know what you call that, and something else. 17 years old, he got 45 years. 45 years. Now, 17 years old, 45 years. In Texas, you have level 2, level 3. He's in a level 3 prisons. Most of the prisons that I've worked in has either been death row prisons, and Texas has the death row. So the prison that I was working in was right across the street from where they actually execute. Okay? So you know when they're about to execute people because everything gets silent. They announce the time and everything. So this brother got 17 years, 17 years old, 45 years. Is he forgotten? Will he be forgotten? Of course he's going to be forgotten. The only people that's going to remember him is his family. Or, alhamdulillah, he didn't commit any murder, so the family, it's not a family that he has caused any harm to that will remember him in a bad way. I give you another scenario of why we are forgotten in the prison system. I'm in the barbershop. One of the brothers that's in the community, in the Muslim community in the prison that I'm working in, he's cutting hair. So this young brother come in, because always, in the barbershop, in the prison, in the barbershop, on the street. That's where we hang out at, okay? So this brother came in, young brother, he wanted to know about some Islam. So he's in the chair, right? And the barber that's cutting him, started asking him where he's from. Brother said he's from Louisiana, right? So he starts, yeah, I'm from Louisiana. What part of Louisiana are you from? Shreveport. Yeah, I'm from Shreveport. What street you on? Yeah, I'm on William Street, something like that. Yeah, man, I ain't been on William Street in about 25 years. It was this fine sister I used to know. Her name was Miss Avery. He said, man, Miss Avery was my mama. Right? Now check it. There's an old dude sitting on the corner, in the corner of the barber shop, right? He said, so Miss Avery, your mama, and you was dealing with Miss Avery. How old are you? So this brother's cutting the hair. He said, man, I'm 42. So the old man got the head. What year you was born in? Come to find out, that's his father. So now you got 3 generations in the prison system, level 3, that didn't even know grandfather, father, and son. All right? Now, I want you to follow me in this mentality. I'm going to give you one more story. Old brother in the community, he got to be 65, between 65 and 70 years old. He has already did 47 years. Okay? 47 years. So we used to call him Moses because he was the oldest dude up in here, right? So we called him Moses. So one day, I asked all the brothers, why Moses up in here? They said, man, Moses did something. I don't know what he did. So everybody was kind of afraid of Moses, asking Moses what he did. So one day, me and Moses was very close. He got very close to me. And one thing, anybody that has worked in the prison system as a child, as a volunteer, especially if you go in consistent, those brothers will protect you with their lives. They will not allow anything to happen to you. They will not allow anything to happen to you. One day we did an Eid program. I was a chaplain in California, and I took my wife with me. And when we walked into the yard, it was like a conglomerate of brothers surrounding my wife like a diamond. And they was like looking as they was walking, they was like daring anybody to come over there and touch her. So as a chaplain, I always felt protected. It was mentioned yesterday in one of the programs that when a chaplain goes into the prison system, if he is a Muslim imam instead of a chaplain, the brothers will be down with you until death. So anyway, so finally I asked Moses. I said, Moses came into my office. I said, Moses. I said, look, man, you done been in this joint for 47, 48 years. What? You can never be afraid, so to speak. I said, what the hell did you do? Right? So Moses said, man, Imam, I really appreciate 19 years old, I was strung out. This, I was doing that. I was always high, but I was very mother, man. I would never go home high. I'd be out, wigged out. I could have just robbed or killed somebody. This is what he told me. But when I came home, my hands was clean. I changed my clothes. I said, yes, ma'am. So one day, he was estranged from his father. So one day, he came home and he found his mother strung out on the floor. She was beat up. His father was strung out on crack also. So when he lifted his mother up, cleaned her up, took her to the hospital, she finally admitted to him who it was that beat her up. It came to be his father, biological father. So he went on a rampage. He was also from Louisiana. And that's another story from another time. Louisiana, the state of Louisiana. So he's riding around the city looking for his father. He's kicking in doors, blah, blah, blah. Finally, he gets to a place where his father is staying at. This woman opens the door. He says, where is so-and-so? Say, I haven't seen you, need to come. No, where's so-and-so? I don't know. So he's in a rage. He kills the woman, puts two up in her. So when he's explaining it to me, listen to the language. He said, I killed my father's mother. The disconnect is that is his grandmother. You understand where I'm going? So now, if you can be locked up and make a disconnect from something that you did, I would imagine if Moses ever came to the realization that he can actually admit to himself that he killed his grandmother, he would probably die. He would probably die. But he had to separate it in his mind in order to survive in prison. Now, one last thing I'm going to leave you with. When I was doing my research as a chaplain, as I was going through my residency and my master's, one of the stories one of the historical portions of prisons in America that I came across, and this is why they are forgotten to us. And as Muslims, we cannot forget any part of our ummah. And if we forget any part of our ummah, it's like forgetting a part of our body. The thing about it is that we have taken on the millah of this society. We haven't taken on the millah of Ibrahim alayhi salatu salam. We have taken on the millah of this society. And this millah of this society tells us where we need to disconnect from the lesser of us, of society, or the downtrodden of society. And I'm telling you from what I know, there are people, and you hear this all the time, there are people that's locked up for crimes that they didn't commit, and they doing serious times. How many people in the last year or so you heard on the news, them spent 30 years, 35 years in prison, and because of now DNA evidence, they let them out. And they give them like $30,000 or some foolishness like that. So society, this millah, which is a corrupt millah, makes us forget. Because we want to forget. Because some of us got criminals in our own family. Now I'm going to start talking about the mothers and hiding their sons and stuff like that. That's another story too. You know? So we'll leave that alone. My boy ain't do nothing. He all right. But that's a different story, sisters. I ain't going to get on y'all today. But, so, look at this particular mind frame that we are dealing with, where we are conditioned by our environment on how to treat our own. That's why the women prisons, they need help galore. The women prisons, where there's Muslims in there, they need help galore. And I'm going to tell you, if any one of you plan on volunteer as sisters, be prepared. Be prepared to meet the sister that calls herself the Imam and her husband is right next to her. Be prepared for that. Because we got some of those in our families too. So you want to forget. This is how we forget, because the society, the millah of the society tells us how to deal. Instead of us coming back to Quran or coming back to the Seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on how to deal with our society. When we look at our obligations as Muslims and what we are supposed to be doing as far as dawah is concerned, it is non-stop. It is 24/7. Because we have to get right with Allah in order for us to be right with our ummah. And as long as we are denying our own insecurities, our own fear, our own inabilities, whatever they may be, it'll be easy to forget until one of our own get locked up. Now let one of our own children get locked up for something they did or didn't do. We'll be looking for the best lawyer. We'll be looking for the Muslims to contribute. We'll be calling care. We'll be blowing up the phone. Everything to try to get help for that particular child. And we constantly on the subconscious mind saying that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, what happens to the children that's behind these bars? So the story that I was going to tell you as I was studying in the prison system of America, especially down south, Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, Arkansas, Florida, this went on all day long. Like, say, for example, I was walking down the street and the sheriff came behind me. This is between the 1900s and the 1940, right? I'm walking down the street in the south. And the sheriff come pick me up. And he said, you know, you owe Mr. Bob $20. I said, well, I paid Mr. Bob his $20. I said, no, Mr. Bob gave you his mule for a day and you were supposed to pay him $20. He said, sir, I paid Mr. Bob $20, right? And he said, Mr. Bob wrote me a receipt. And so the sheriff, this is actually a story, right? A real story. So the sheriff said the N-word, you think you're trying to be funny? You know I can't read. So why not locking him up, right? Locking this dude up for, let's say, 6 months, hard labor, right? Now, when it's time to get out, he calls Mr. Bob, the one that he owed $20 to, and said, Mr. Bob, Jeremiah is about to get out. Do you want it? Yes. So Mr. Bob will come to the sheriff's office and pay him $100. Now the brother is now a slave to Mr. Bob on his farm. This was the prison system. So now, if you go back in history and you look at hard labor, like Angola, especially Texas, Louisiana and Texas, and how those brothers was out there cutting trees early in the morning and widening the road and this, that, and other. This was, when they was talking about yesterday, the 13th Amendment, this is exactly what it was. That because you committed a crime, you are now obligated to slavery, what they call prison. So now, Muslims in my last the only reason, again, that we have forgotten is because we want to forget until it's right up on us. We can't forget our brothers and sisters in the prison system because, as they say, they're going to become our neighbors. Some of them are going to be a part of our families. Some of them, for whatever reason, brothers and or sisters, married brothers and sisters that's coming, and why not? Doesn't everybody deserve a second chance? How many chances we got? We supposed to be free. How many chances did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us? How many more chances do we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us? So now, these brothers and sisters, what they need is realism. They don't need to come out of the joint, the university, come to the masjid, you give them 100 hugs, and then that's it. They don't see you no more. There's no development. There's no mentorship. There's no real sisterhood, brotherhood with them. They are left to their own device. They are left to their own thinking of Islam. There's nothing set up for them, their children, or their marriage. We have to become a society of Muslims that are socially aware of our own needs. The middle of this society do not need to tell us what we need to do with our people. Until we establish clinics that are across this country, until we establish schools across this country, until we establish basic lessons for Muslims that have been Muslims for 10 years, or Muslims that's coming out of this university, whether we or not, unless we establish schools for them, schools for ourselves on a consistent basis, there will always be forgotten because you want to forget about yourself. Because some of us walk around like we got this thing on lock. I would really like to know, please explain to me afterwards how you got Islam on lock when we are still waiting for the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do we have anything on lock? So should we draw our brothers and sisters in when we know we got political prisoners? How many of you all recently, and I'm just calling these names out, but there's thousands of Imam Jamils in the pocket. Thousands of them that was accused of a crime that they didn't commit. How many of them they got to be famous in order for you to protest? They got to be famous in order for you to get involved with some type of organization to free political prisoners? But we, as my sister said so eloquently yesterday, they throw out a flashlight over to the right side so our intelligence or our peripheral vision shifts to the flashlight because it's bright over there. While they're making money with you over there, while everything over here is going to hell. So this is how the Muslim community gets divided. Lastly, stop saying that you don't have any racism within you. All of us have some racism in us, or bigotry. We just don't want to admit it. Because otherwise, if the inner city is really that important, when it's time to get your own little apartment, you will move into the inner city. You will move into the suburbs. But you can't be around those type of people. Haven't you heard your own language? So, alhamdulillah, may Allah Ta'ala forgive us all our shortcomings and our sins. And may Allah Ta'ala keep us on the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May Allah Ta'ala allow all of us to see each other in Jannah Firdaus. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to meet the holy last messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Yeah, Muslims, we got one shot at this. There's a lot of work to do in our society, in our Islamic community. And unless you want to get dirty, unless you want to be involved, we can all give a good speech. We can all give reminders, and that's all this is a reminder. But when it's time to do the work, where are you? And it got to be more than one time. And feed the homeless, alhamdulillah, that's a good cause, but that ain't enough. That ain't enough. If you know somebody, either male or female, that is locked up and they got children, why don't we try to help the children? This is why we need schools. This is why our masters need to stop being big mausoleums where we are so in awe with, and have actual community development for the Muslims. Inshallah ta'ala. أقول هذا واستغفر الله وأليكم الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you, Imam, for beautiful words. And we can do some questions a little bit later after Sister Ieasha speaks. So now we have Imam Khalid Griggs. He's going to be speaking about bringing down the walls of Muslim suburbia. I got introduced who you are. Imam Khalid Griggs is the community mosque center of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He's the executive director of ICNA Council for Social Justice, a member of ICNA National Shura, chairman Muslim Alliance for Black Lives, and he's a member of the sponsoring committee, Industrial Areas Foundation of Forsyth County, North Carolina. He was a former editor of Message International Magazine and a former member of the Islamic Party in North America. So.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Brothers and sisters, before I get into this brief talk, I want to acknowledge my dear sister Ieasha, Ustadha. And I want to acknowledge her at the very beginning, because we have many growing and budding scholars in the Ummah here in this part of the world today. But Ustadha Ieasha is one who brings her scholarship to the field. And as they used to say in the South, at least I heard they used to say, she puts Islam where the goats, down on the ground where the goats can get to it. And so she makes very complex, just ideas, very simple for us to understand. Sister Ieasha, I was talking with a sister from Gambia, and your name came up. And she said that, and I was talking about, this sister really is a prolific, dynamic sister, and very much a da'i and a scholar. And she said, well, you don't know what she's doing in Gambia. She has established a foundation here. And she's doing so much for the people of Gambia. So I don't want to embarrass you, but I just think that she's so busy. I had the opportunity to tell her, so I wanted you to know this. Brothers and sisters, for a few moments, I want to take on the role of an alarm clock. And it sounds kind of crazy. You all know about alarm clocks. Some of you may set your clock in the morning for Salatul Fajr. You want to get a few more minutes, but it's blasting. It's waking you up. And I want to play that role just for a few moments. Because the brother whose example is so dear to me and so dear to so many others, Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Shabazz, was quoted so often and was heard saying so often that before people can go into action, you have to wake them up first. And if they have all kinds of social ills that are stopping them from realizing who they are, you got to stand them up first. And then after you stand them up, then it's much easier for you to be able to get production from them. But you got to wake them up first. You got to stand them up. And so as this alarm clock today, I just want to take a few minutes because I truly believe that when we know better, we'll do better. And so some of the things that I'm saying, I'm not saying them to try to hurt anyone's feelings or insult anyone. I'm just talking generically about the community of Muslims that we have here in the United States. And I'll begin by talking about this subject of bringing down the walls of Muslim suburbia. Whether many of you know it or not, that was anachronistic. It was a kind of a word that didn't make sense years ago here in the United States. For the most part, there was no such thing as development of Muslim communities in the suburban areas across the United States. This was a time that I'm talking about when most of the people who were coming either from overseas or who were indigenous to this land were worshiping in the inner cities of the United States. And why was that a phenomenon? It was a phenomenon because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had gifted those primarily in the African American community, one of the most oppressed communities in the United States, had gifted us with the guidance of Islam. And with the limited resources that we had in these communities, we were doing our best to establish a presence for Islam in cities all across this country. And then something happened in 1965. And it happened right at not at the heels, but at a very important juncture of the civil rights movement in this country. And that was an immigration bill was passed after the civil rights bill was passed in 1964. I call it a selective immigration bill was passed. In 1965, the United States said that all of y'all folks who are coming or trying to get in this country, who are coming from Pakistan, who are coming from India, coming from this country or that, coming from Arabia, wherever you're coming from, if you're not coming from Europe, prior to this immigration bill, especially from Muslim countries, the immigration to America was literally kind of a trickle. It's not to say that there weren't Muslims from Muslim majority countries, but it was a trickle relative to what happened after 1965. And so what happened when those new Muslims arrived in America? There was no, as I said, there was no suburban centers to go to. If you wanted to identify with Islam at that time, and you can ask brothers who came here in the 1960s, in the 1970s, you can ask them where did they pray? Because many of us, if you're too young to know the story, you think that what we see in suburban America today has always been there. That it's just improved, that it's just developed. That's not true history. That's not true facts. And I want to just wake myself and wake you up to certain realities so that we can discharge the responsibilities that we have to try to establish Islam and develop Islam throughout the communities in which we live. Not just restrictive, not just saying that we are satisfied with what is going on outside of the inner cities. Brothers and sisters, let me just share a couple of other historical facts, and then I'll try to get to the real subject that I've been asked to speak about. At the same time, when selective immigration was in place in this country, and the United States said, we want the best and the brightest. We want those, we will allow you to come from these Muslim majority countries, but we want the smartest ones. We want the ones who are already doctors and engineers and lawyers. We want the ones who have PhDs, who they're teaching in those universities where they're coming from, or they're in a track to continue their education in the United States to fulfill those professional roles. This is a reality. It was selective immigration. So those during this period who were coming into this country, they came not struggling like those of us in a lot of these inner cities. They were coming, they were bringing wealth with them, many of them. I have brothers in the community where I'm the Imam, and they told me about, I would ask them, well, how did you amass so much money in such a short period of time? And many of them said, I didn't amass it. When I got here, I had money before I came here. So when I came and was allowed to come into the country, I just invested my money. I set up businesses. So don't think there's something really exceptional about me. I had money when I got here. And then those have told me, and I believe them. And I've been to many of the countries where our brothers and sisters who constitute this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu in this part of the world. I've been to many of these countries. And I've seen the conditions of how so many of the people live in these countries. And it used to confuse me. Because as a young Muslim, I thought, like, wow, everybody they just got so much money. They must have streets filled with just all kinds of money. People just picking it up and just getting rich. But this was not the case then, and this is not the case now. And so, by the same time that our Muslim brothers and sisters, so many of them so sincere, so many of them coming here dedicated and committed to this team, but so many others were not coming for the establishment of Islam in this country. They were coming for very justifiable reasons to better the conditions of their families. That's a noble enterprise for someone to say, I want my children, I want my wife to have a better life than I'm able to provide for them here, so I'll come to America. And so to cut the story a little shorter and get to the real point that I'm trying to get to, that there was a kind of organic divide that developed from those newly arriving in the United States who were in the inner cities, who were giving money to these inner city mosques. There was, and remember, it's at the same time of the civil rights movement. So it means that a number of the African Americans at that time also were able to have employment, careers that afforded them the opportunity to move out of the inner city and move into the suburbs all across this country. But one other phenomenon I want to just mention, at the same time that this was going on, the U.S. government was allowing, and sometimes, do the research, I'm not making up stuff, they were allowing and sometimes being the mechanism by which drugs could be brought into this country and targeted distribution to the African American community in particular. Why? Because some of the black folks were getting all stirred up, and a lot of organizations and a lot of things were happening that were challenging what was going on in the communities. And so one way to put down any opposition is to narcotize a community. The British did it in China. Those, founding fathers did it here in what has become the United States. We got all this land with these Native Americans running around here. They don't know what to do with it. Give them alcohol. They can't drink. If they drink, they don't resist. We can go and just take their land. We don't have to fight and kill them. Just give them alcohol. That is used as a social tranquilizer. And this was used in the African American community at the time that this newly arrived Muslims were coming into the country. And so we got a sociological mix here that if you're not careful, you can just say, man, all black people, all they do is just take drugs, right? I see them on the street. When I was young and used to go to New York and spend the summers with my aunt, I was fascinated by the intravenous heroin users who would be on the subways. I've never seen anything like it in my life before or since. It was something about the use of heroin that the trains would be turning corners and waving, and everybody else is holding on for dear life. But those heroin users would just stand there. They would have to hold on. They would just nod all the way almost like, no, hit the floor, hit the ground. And the train or they would nod all the way, they lean over. This is the image that was presented, that and worse, that was presented to many of our brothers and sisters coming from Muslim majority countries. This was the image that was projected, that they saw. And so as these neighborhoods became crime infested and drug infested, it made nothing but sense that if you could afford to get into a safe place for your family, your children, your wife, then I'm going to take my mother out of that environment because it ain't safe anymore. And so I'm just painting a picture of how Islam started its growth in the United States. And you can disagree with the picture that I'm painting, but that's just my understanding. And so what has happened, to jump right into the reason why I'm standing here today, that what has happened, and Sister Ieasha is going to give us information about these glorious early movements of Islam in this country. And we can appreciate and understand what it is, but people like myself, who are allowed to be involved and live long enough to live through one period into another period, then what people like myself are seeing, that there is a need for those of our brothers who have come into the United States and have developed very good living in the United States, not to take money and bring it to me in my inner city house, in my inner city mosque in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, but to help the cause of Islam, to help be a part of the revitalization of Islam in these somewhat abandoned Muslim, abandoned neighborhoods in what's left of the inner city. And so now the demographics of these neighborhoods have changed. I can remember growing up in the city I grew up in, I'm marveling even today, driving through neighborhoods which were African-American neighborhoods for generations. And now whole areas and neighborhoods, this is not a bad thing, I'm just talking about social phenomena. And now these neighborhoods are African-American, they are Latino, and now many of them in the city where I'm living have large African, West African populations sharing the same space in these neighborhoods. That's a good thing. It's a good thing. But what I'm saying is that there is a need for us to leverage the resources of the total Muslim community for the benefit of those who have been denied, for whatever reason, the resources to be able to build and establish the kinds of institutions that could serve the communities in which they're located. It's a problem, it's an issue. And so the Islamic Circle of North America Council for Social Justice has established a group that we just refer to simply as MABLE. And MABLE stands for the Muslim Alliance for Black Lives. And this is a group that some of us within ICNA and getting our ideas from other brothers and sisters who weren't a part of the organization, talking about some of the things that we have been talking about today, realized that there needed to be something going on to help bring resources. I'm not just talking about financial resources. That's just sometimes a small part of it. But if we have a community, as we have in this country, that so many of our brothers and sisters have very high levels of academic training, brilliant young people. We have so many IT folks. There are folks in like Dallas, Texas, that I'll use as an example, who say, okay, when Mabel wants to be able to go into the inner cities and provide training for some of the youth in these inner city communities, that it's no problem for us to come in and establish classes, to teach them coding, to give them tablets, to give them, because we're making money, we got the money. So it's nothing for us to buy laptops, it's nothing for us to buy these tablets. And we will program them, we will train these inner city kids to prepare them not to be waitresses and waiters in cafeterias and restaurants, because those jobs seem like they're going to be gone pretty soon. Certain parts of the country, they're already using robots in restaurants to come and bring the food. The robots are talking to you, like probably sometimes more respect and respectfully than the humans do. And they're talking to people, they're using robots, automation, robotics is the future. And so if you and I look at this Muslim community as a whole, and not just those Muslims over there and these Muslims out there, we look at it as a whole. We're one ummah. And no one is trying to get in anybody's pocket. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the responsibility to want for our brothers and sisters what we want for ourselves. No one is saying go build houses and just give free rent for people in the inner cities. But what I am suggesting and what Mabel is attempting to do is attempting to leverage the diversity of the total Muslim community to be able to bring human, financial, and physical resources to revitalize Islam in the inner city communities. Let me give you one example and I'll be done. In Dallas, Texas, Mabel has been involved with a collaborative effort. It's the Mabel people who are actually physically doing the work in a public housing unit, the largest public housing unit in Dallas. Some of y'all probably thought that Dallas was nothing but milk and honey and gold streets and paved streets and no poor people, because we hear about Dallas being the hijra for Muslims, and we look at the beautiful, wonderful developments, housing, Islamic centers. More money can be raised that is in Dallas amongst the Muslims, perhaps close to maybe anywhere else in the country. But all of Dallas are not streets paved with gold. And there's a very huge, the largest public housing unit in Dallas is called Oak Cliff. And one of our brothers, who is a Mabel member, did 27 years, straight years in the penitentiary. And he honed certain skills while he was in the penitentiary. And when he got out, because he was a gangbanger, he did a lot of different things. When he got out, and now that he's Muslim, he wants to know, what can I do? How can I help? And it was a perfect kind of confluence of Mabel getting started there in Dallas and having people who were willing to invest money in a concept, in an idea, and see whether or not we drop the seeds in the ground and whether it's going to germinate, whether it's going to become real. And I stand here today not trying to exaggerate, but this to me is an example. This one project is an example of how Islam can be revitalized in the inner city communities. And it's a project in which those who know nothing about the conditions of the people in the inner city are helping, providing the skills and abilities that they have to try to make those Muslim communities, make those communities, those neighborhoods, to bring them back up to a certain kind of social and economic standard. Within about 45 days of opening, I'll say 2 months, within 2 months of opening this empowerment center, 10 people from the neighborhood in this Oak Cliff housing development embraced Islam. And as a result of their embracing Islam, a musalla had to be designated as part of the building for the empowerment center. We were thinking one thing, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had another plan. We were thinking about just the presence of Muslims trying to be a resource to the community, like many of us did all the way back in the 60s and the 70s, that this would be a formula by which those who are non-Muslims will see the sincerity of the Muslims and see the attitude of the Muslims, and I want to be a part of that. And so we're seeing in this short period of time, we're seeing how the neighbors, we're seeing responding, taking shahada. We're seeing how the neighbors are responding to the Muslims who are in this Oak Cliff development. It's something that I've been involved, and I'll end on this note. I've been involved in a number of different Muslim related or Muslim operated projects over the years. And this Mabel operation, this Muslim Alliance for Black Lives, the potential that it has all across the country is something that I really thank Allah to have been a part of this particular effort before Allah takes my soul. Because I see the potential, I see what it can do, not just in Dallas. I see the potential, like we have an operation in New York. We have an operation in Houston, Texas. We will have soon an operation in 2 or 3 other major American cities. And Allah knows best whether we will have the same kind of success wherever it expands to. But some of us don't want us to look at Islam in the African American community as a historic footnote in the history of Islam in this country. And so much of this effort is being put in these neighborhoods because we believe that there's a future for Islam in this community. I'll say this, and I said twice, I said this is my third time. I don't understand this last thing I'm gonna say. So this is my third time. This is the real thing that I'm getting ready to say now. But another issue that we are seeing too is that with the demographics having changed in so many of the inner city communities now, the necessity to have folks, da'is, who can go into these communities and can speak the language of beef. They can speak Spanish. They can speak Wolof. They can speak a language of the people who are living in these communities. They will be able to communicate. This is very essential. And so I ask that, I appreciate your patient indulgence of what I've shared with you, but it is an appeal. It's an appeal for each and every one of us not to be satisfied with where we are in our development as Muslims today. Don't ever be satisfied. Don't ever accept, but this is just how it is. That was what it was in the past. It's not that anymore. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of all things. And so let us make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will strengthen this ummah of Muhammad sallallahu in the inner cities of this country and in the suburbs. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us an understanding of this deen that is useful for us in this world and in the next.
Khalid, thank you for the beautiful words, and may Allah accept your efforts. Now we'll have Ustadha Ieasha Prime discussing the golden age of Islam in America. Sister Ieasha Prime converted to Islam more than 20 years ago after being a youth ambassador to Morocco and Senegal. She's mother of 3 children.
Ieasha! Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. I'm actually incredibly grateful to be amongst you, incredibly grateful for your love, for your support, for your shout outs, for your du'as. You ever have a moment where you feel like you have so much emotion inside of you, you might just like faint or vomit? I'm having a moment like that. Where I listen to my brother, subhanAllah, from the very beginning until now. And my book is just full of notes where there's so much, subhanAllah, in this situation to unpack that I know we don't have time, right? And so I ask for your forgiveness in advance that I'm probably going to talk very fast because I want to kind of put a lot in there because there's so much, subhanAllah, that my brothers just like, they laid out for you. And so, I want to do my best to honor them and to build on the legacy that they have already built. And to do my best, subhanAllah, to kind of bring forth the conversation that they have to this concluding moment. And may Allah intervene and help, Ya Rabbi. So I want to start off actually with 2 concepts from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was a famous Sahaba by the name of Nu'man. And Nu'man, radiallahu ta'ala, he was known as like a jokester. He was a prankster. He was someone that used to love to, just joke and to laugh. And subhanAllah, I'll give you one narration where literally Nu'man saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he was looking hungry, right? And so he looked to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, so he went to another Sahaba and said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam needs some money because I need to buy him a meal. Fast forward, he buys the meal, he gives it to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A couple days later, that Sahaba who gave the money sees the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and says, Ya Rasulullah, how are you doing? You need anything from me? Basically, what he was trying to say is like, oh, Messenger of Allah, do you need my Cash App, my Venmo to repay back that money? So the way he asked the Prophet, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam became very clear and aware. Like he said, do I owe you some money? He said, yeah, you remember the other day you were hungry, a man came to me and told me you needed some money. So the Prophet went to man and said, man, did you borrow some money from him on my behalf? And so he said, yeah, Ya Rasulullah, I knew you were hungry, I don't have no money. And so the Prophet laughed, the same way you laughed, right? And he went and found a way to give him back the money. Now, the thing about this particular Sahaba, I tell you this story just to kind of even warm your heart to who this individual was. But the thing about this particular Sahaba is that when they would come to the prayer lines, oftentimes he would fall down drunk. And they would literally, subhanAllah, take their foot and kind of push him out of the prayer line and close it back. Right? And subhanAllah, he get clean. Right? He comes to the masjid, he'll be good. At Dhuhr time, he's good. By Ieasha, he's falling down drunk in the prayer line. And subhanAllah, it got to the point that he had been warned, he had been counseled, he had been, everything that they could do in order to, to guide him aright. And subhanAllah, it came time that he actually had to receive the punishment, to receive the hudud for not just drunkenness, but public drunkenness. So at the time that they're, giving him the lash, a portion of his sweat and his blood actually fell on one particular very famous Sahaba. And that Sahaba, subhanAllah, said, ugh, like if blood would have splashed on you from saying, he said, ugh. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't even think, of course, to be disgusted by your brother for whatever you think about him. He loves Allah and His Messenger. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I tell us that story, and I, want to give another one really quickly. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is sitting, group of companions, one of them from Ahl Sufa, which are considered, they were like the homeless people of Medina. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't send them away. They actually were like on his front porch, is where they were known to be. So one time he's sitting with them, and in this particular time, there's a noble who comes. He wants to hear the message of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there's a particular one amongst them that has the stench of poverty. And as the noble comes, right, the noble is sitting next to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the poor from Ahl Sufa actually comes to join him. Forgive me. And as he comes, he gathers his clothes. Right? He gathers his clothes to let him pass, so he doesn't touch him. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sees him and says, "Are you afraid to catch what he has?" And this Sahaba said, "Ya Rasulullah, don't worry. I'm more afraid to catch what he has." And so when asked, what are you afraid to catch what he has? I'm afraid to catch his kibr. He's afraid that my poverty might somehow rub off on him. But I'm more afraid that his arrogance might rub off on me. There are a number of things that when we say we're going to live in this place, in this country, that when we say that this is our home, that we are invested, that we are willing to, from everything, to pay taxes, and just all the things in order to be here, then it becomes imperative upon us in order for us to understand what is this country in which we live in. Especially as we are in the age of fighting for Palestine, you need to understand the legacy of this country, because literally what you're living in is what would be, let's say, 30, 40, 50, 100 years later of the occupied Gaza, you're living in it. And I know that's just not what we thought when we came over in immigration, right? That we're thinking when they decided to come know, you will live on this side and you will, when the census comes out, they will mark Black, African American, and you will mark white.
Come on.
And as a result of you marking, them marking African American and you marking white, there's certain neighborhoods that you would be given incentive to live in. And those neighborhoods are getting certain government funding for how they would develop. So they have certain STEM programs and, they don't need to be donated laptops and all of that because that's already, your tax dollars are already going to take care of those schools. Already, and those children are on a track to some of the excellent education institute and some highlights because now you've got a history of being able to go to the bank and get a loan. So you can, whether you need to get a loan for your child's education or you need to get, certain federal, now if you're able to do that, there's a certain track for success that exists for a group of people that doesn't always easily exist for another group of people. And I'm not talking about because they're lazy, because they are just destitute, because they're ignorant. No. I'm talking about in terms of by policy and by design. And we don't have enough time to unpack all that, but you do need to look at what redlining is. You do need to look at concepts of medical apartheid. You need to know where you live. Otherwise, the way we protest and the way we don't even understand the history of student encampment unless you are willing to revisit that history. I told y'all this was going to be, I'm trying my best. Fast forward to Al-Haj Malik El-Shabazz, and he says, if you're not careful, the media, the newspapers, will have you hating the one who is oppressed while loving the one who's doing the oppression. And sometimes we don't realize how we fell. Not just fell, but we were like reeled in to that trap. Right? Even amongst those who, let's say, who said they got out. Love. There's so much love. Let me say this. Imam Khalid Griggs mentioned something it's really important to know. I want to give a little bit. Will you give me a little bit of time? It's okay. I just want to cover just a little bit of history. Then we'll bring it back, I promise. It's important. Around the 1920s, prior to the Nation of Islam, in the early 1920s, you had Dawood Faisal, rahmatullah alayhi. You had Dawood Faisal, as well as his wife Khadija. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to elevate their rank and put light in their grave and expand their benefit. Amen. But this community was a very strong Sunni Muslim community. And this very strong Sunni Muslim community actually became what we consider basically the floodgates opening of people converting to Islam. They would buy up entire blocks, right, where they would own the street. They owned not only in terms of masjids, but community centers, the level of programming and what they established. And subhanAllah, even there were students from them who went to Al-Azhar, came back. And so in the early 1920s, it's really important that we understand that little piece, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Because most of us, when we think about the glory of Islam, the first one we think about is who? We think about the Nation of Islam. But there's a decade more that actually happens before that. And part of them only telling you the narrative that starts with the Nation of Islam so they can present you to the rest of the Ummah as ignorant, that you didn't fully know your deen. It's because you didn't have strong aqidah. It's because you didn't have knowledge. So they can present you in a certain way and then begin again your narrative where they want it to begin. So that you become again a footnote in their story, right? And the footnote in their story, you can talk about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X because they are a response to their oppression. You know, so by saying they are a response, they are a reaction to the civilization that we built. So as a result of them being the response, they're not the headline. They're not the forerunners. They're the ones who reacted. So that's why I want to tell you, just to take a little minute, that in the year that Malcolm X was born, Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz Malcolm Little, when he was born, you're all familiar with Tulsa. Yes? Are you? Raise your hand if you're familiar with Tulsa. Too many of you are not familiar with Tulsa. Tulsa wasn't an anomaly. Tulsa was considered Black Wall Street. They had it in, that was in Oklahoma, in Nebraska, Oklahoma. They had Tulsa, Oklahoma. They also had some of these same cities where I'm from in Florida, which were considered entire Black towns. Black banks, Black businesses, Black-owned cleaners, Black-owned restaurants, Black everything in the area. And so this idea of they were always dependent, right? They were always needy. They always needed a handout from us. No, you need to know in that year, Lord have mercy. In that year, also you have to know who his father was, right? In the movement of do for self. This is also a result of Sheikh Dawud Ahmed Faisal, right? In this movement of do for self and establish our own communities. What did they do to those communities? If you don't know, they burned it to the ground. They burned it to the ground and said, you will not have your own businesses. You will not have your own banks. You will not have your own community. And matter of fact, when I let you have another community in the areas that I give you to live in, I will name it Malcolm X Boulevard and Martin Luther King Boulevard, so you can be reminded of what I will do to you if you rise up. So I'm going to let you have your martyrs as heroes, so you can always remember in the end that will kill you and your movements. So what happened with the Do for Self movement that actually, as a result, I think I mentioned this in a previous lecture, what happened to those movements like the Black Panther Party, who what they ultimately wanted to do was say, we want to educate our own children. We want to feed our own children. We're not asking you for government assistance. We'll actually give it because we know what you're doing with the food, right? This is before they understood about genetically modified. Now, we will feed our own children. We'll provide our own children programs. And even, subhanAllah, these Black Panthers connected with those of what we consider the Palestinian movement. And subhanAllah, there's a Black Panther office in Palestine. A mile and a half, subhanAllah, from Masjid al-Aqsa. They were a part of our journey. We could go on. But anyway, the point is, what did they do to kill that movement? Yes, they sent an agent provocateurs, but they flooded. This is a CIA document. You can look it up. This ain't hard. You can Google this. I'm not telling you something wow, be honest with you. Right? They flooded it with heroin, with PCP. They flooded it with drugs. Why did they flood it with drugs? And they said programs as you're struggling. Opioid didn't become a mental health crisis until it went into the suburbs. That drug abuse didn't become something we need to be concerned about as a country until it went across the red line. When it went on the other side of the subway line. But then again, why did the CIA, I want you to know what country you live in now, why did they flood it with drugs? Because they can undermine the movement. They begin to create dissension with agent provocateurs between the men and the women. Those programs that you had, they begin to create all kinds of dissension on multiple levels, and that will take a whole long time to talk about the dissension between men and women and why they did that intentionally, but it's something you need to know because it's a reality that we're living in right now. In terms of people talking about, the problem in the Black community is the breakdown of the Black family. Well, do you know how that happened? Do you know how the Black family broke up? It wasn't just because they're so ignorant and they always fighting. No. We had not only Black families, we had extended families where the grandmother, the grandfather, and we lived together. There was intentionally destruction, and I don't have time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant tawfiq wal afiyah. What did we gain from the inner city? What was it about it? because I want us to, again, so we fast forward from Brooklyn, New York, which actually traveled into what we now know, while there's still certain African American Muslim communities inside of Philadelphia, inside of Ohio, inside of Oakland, California, down in the South as well. The reason why, subhanAllah, a lot of that continued into Atlanta is because you had the likes of like Imam who actually came from that Dar movement. And again, that Dar movement was an extension, right, of Sheikh Faisal. Am I right? That's correct. So that Dar movement came as a result of that. They had their own land, right? They had, again, their own land, their own businesses. Now we're going to go to the decade of the Nation of Islam. We look at them and we talk about, in terms of their Aqidah. Okay, whatever. But they had land. They had not only their own farms, their own factories, their own restaurants. Matter of fact, their fishing industry was so big, they actually had planes. They owned their own planes that they were bringing in fish from Argentina. They had an agreement with the South American government for how to bring in food to say we will feed ourselves. How did they undermine that? First, with the Muslim community, they undermined the legitimacy of it. Right? So, and we need to understand in terms of us. Again, I'm not addressing Aqidah at this moment, so don't come beat me up when I get off the stage at the door, okay? I'm not addressing their Aqidah at the moment, but in terms of a successful movement as identifying. And why is it important that even as identifying as Muslims? Because what we gain from them is what it means to be unapologetically, visibly Muslim. Right? And willing to say, not only as as a man, I'm going to be unapologetically, visibly Muslim, but yes, my wives and my daughters and the women in the community will be visibly Muslim, and I'm willing to give security on every block wherever you can find them. You will find their security. I dare you. The men of that time, what we gained from them was a deep sense of rajula, a deep sense of masculinity, and yes, unapologetic masculinity. A type of masculinity that says, if I raise my hand and say, I wish she would say, Allahu Akbar, Muhammad, you find them brothers coming out the woodworks. There's a number, even within family and community structures, there was a system of accountability. I got a brother's name on my phone right now that said, sister, if that brother do anything to you, when I was getting married, if that brother do anything to you, this is my number. Raise your hand if you remember that system. Right? Listen, they need to bring it back. Domestic violence was something that was still in check because there were still community systems. I remember when I remember the brother who used to be in Master Muhammad. They actually had a 12-step Islamically guided program. Right? Jamaat al-Islamiyya. There we go. Right? They had a program for addressing, right, addiction from our community, from things that were specific to Islam. Now we made them brothers and sisters feel so bad for their addiction. Now we send them to AA and NA and wish we had a program that would actually help some of our sons and daughters get unaddicted from marijuana and everything else they laced it with. See, when you don't check it in the inner city, oh, it's coming to you. Oh, Lord, I ain't got time. What time is it? Okay, I'm doing it. I got 11 minutes. Okay, well, some kind of Q&A. All right. When we talk about the golden age of Islam, literally, we can talk about from King Nagasha, King Asmaha of Abyssinia. We can talk about even as it relates to the African Muslim empires that we are no longer discussing, that our children are learning about all the other empires of the world, but they don't know, subhanAllah, the contribution of Muslim empires across Africa and into West Africa. Why do I mention that to you? Because it is those who actually established some of those empires that arrived in the Americas. And so as they were kidnapped and enslaved and brought to the Americas, We're not, see, sometimes we think slave as opposed to enslaved. We think because they were ignorant as opposed to, no, they knew multiple languages. When Imam Kandal arrived on the plantation in Haiti, he was pretending he knew full well he wasn't a slave. What he did was he said, I'm looking for my Quran students. And so he continued to teach those by pretending to grow and cut sugar cane. He began to teach them Ajramiyya, Maliki, Fiqh, and Aqidah. And that became the spark of the Haitian movement, which then began to spark some of all across South America and then into the South of America, what we would call slave revolts and rebellions. Why is that significant? Because the spirit of resistance began with those marginalized Muslims of what we would consider from the Afro and Caribbean regions. The concept of what they mostly give us is that, so then they moved when they came into the Americas and they specifically said, well, you'll move into these neighborhoods, right? That was before they gentrified them because they found value in them. So they moved them into these specifically more cramped areas. But they came with that spirit of resilience. They came with that spirit of resistance. Actually, from them, we also get homeschooling, right? Where where Clara Muhammad said, I'll die dead as this doornail before I allow you to educate my children, before I will allow the oppressor to educate my children. So these movements of homeschool movements, this actually came out of inner city Muslims saying, we have to take control of our children's education. Concept of food programs and giving food to making sure that we take care of our own and community, that comes out of inner city Muslims. Taking care of those who are actually struggling with substance abuse, which is actually, again, like I mentioned that story in the beginning because it existed during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and how did the prophetic community actually embrace, he's a Sahaba, right? These are Sahaba we're talking about. So these are things that they actually understood. We have to have these own programs. We have to have our own programs that address this. Again, in terms of businesses and all of that, there's reason how it became underdeveloped. And long story short, if I were to say anything so that we have the opportunity to be able to have Q&A, one of the biggest things in order for us to redevelop the glory days of the inner city Muslim. Oh, let me say this other point. Every day, I used to live in the suburbs in Virginia, but I went to school in DC. Every day I came out of the suburb at Foggy Bottom, there would be brothers who would stand in front of the subway. And they have on their Islam hat, and Allahu Akbar hat. And they were street vendors. But the amount of pamphlets and conversations they gave me about Islam made me so shored up. And as I was actually coming into Islam, having come from West Africa, and as a youth ambassador, and then meeting these brothers, and them actually talking to me about Jesus in the Quran, and Muhammad in the Bible, and the crucifixion or the those who know, right? The crucifixion or the crucifixion. Like these brothers, subhanAllah, it was from their dawah. Right? Street dawah that they were doing, non-stop. This is why you actually had a huge conversion rate within the inner city. For two reasons. One, because you always had a brother who was there. In addition to those people, the Muslims in the inner city were not only just concerned with themselves. They used to actually go door to door giving dawah. There was either door to door, corner to corner, that they felt spreading the light of Islam was their responsibility. They went door to door in their food programs, not only the Muslims. So what we get from them is a deep sense of communal responsibility and a deep sense of do for self, and how do we build our communities? How do we have wrap-around care? How do we not look at those who have come from challenging backgrounds, who end up in the penitentiary or within the penal system? How do we rehabilitate them so that they can become functioning, contributing members of the society? Those are subhanAllah. And again, this wasn't just, they built well. But as we اللهم صل على سيدنا حبيبنا مولانا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. I just want to say on so many levels in terms of what that golden age looked like and how long it actually lasted. The more that we begin to separate from each other in ideology, I mentioned this in another lecture and I'll mention it again. It's important because how do we get separated from our own history? How do we get separated from our own people? How do we start drawing lines based upon somebody else's definitions? And number one happens when we don't understand our history, when we're not educated about it. And then we start to take on the views and the mindsets of another group of people, right? And how they view us, we begin to view each other in that way, not being able to see the value. And again, when 9/11 happened, and Muslims needed to learn how to fight for their civil rights, all of a sudden they remembered those people in the inner city who understood that, right? They begin to realize, oh, we need you who know how to fight for civil rights. Oh, we got, police interference in our community. You survived stop and frisk. You know how to do that. How do we do that? But we didn't give them credit for it. So we actually took from their resources without reciprocity. Right? And so taking from them without reciprocity, lastly, it's the way we view a thing. And I'll close with this. When we want to raise for a youth center in the inner city, we call it fundraising. When we want to raise for an expansion of the masjid, or we want new bathrooms or new wudu, we call it fundraising. We have a nice, beautiful dinner. But when the inner city asks for a youth program or a youth center in the community, we think they pay. We look at them like, we have to give them some sadaqah. We have to help our brothers and sisters in the inner city. Without realizing, had they not had those strong movements they had, you would not be able to stand not only unapologetically Muslim, but visibly Muslim.
You. Jazakallah khairan for your words, Ieasha, very good words. Alhamdulillah, if everybody can please stay for a couple of minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. We'll keep it short, one question per person. Yes, sister, right there.
Peace. Yeah, for real. Yeah. Keep on real.
Imam was speaking about as well. So that means even after her, I went through the ranks of the nation. We need that type of action and discipline and knowledge of who we are before and who we know we are right now. We need that. And I
put all the things together by God's permission. I know I was here for a reason. I know everybody else was here for a reason too. What we need to do, we need to not do this right here. We need to start doing the work.
Stand up, Rick.
Just say this.
Bismillah. You said where you start to work, you gotta come in the inner city. You gotta come on around us and hang out. We got you. No, seriously, you know, I got involved in the prison system by volunteering first. I started off as a volunteer on death row. And the first time I went into prison and that door slammed behind me, I was like, oh Lord. I didn't know any Negro spirituals, but I guess I came out. Like, Lord. So you got to start off as a volunteer first. And I'm telling you, people will see you and they will hook you up.
No matter who it is, you want to understand. It's the theoretical comes from reading books, getting knowledge, and it's also the practical application of what you learn. Don't shortchange your education by not reading. You have to read. You got to read.
Thank you, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. If you have any further questions, please find the speakers outside.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready.
Assalamu alaikum. If I could ask Dr. Zahid Rabi, Brother Edward, and Dr. David, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Please take the questions and photos for outside because we have to make room for the next session.